long before the cities were surrounded tall stoned before the Vikings existed in the far north, in the lands we now call Norway and Sweden, people lived among forests, mountains, and endless lines coast sea, shaped by ice and sea. These people would later be known as the Vikings. Yet, the name Viking did not originally describe people or an ethnic. Instead, it described an activity. To go Viking meant to sail away on a fur journey, often for trade exploration, or sometimes for raiding. Most of the time, however, the people of Scandinavia lived simply lives more as farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, trying to survive in a land where we're long and the soil and often thin and rocky. In the quiet villages of love, the rhythm of the seasons. During the summer months, the days were incredibly long. The sun would linger above the horizon late into the evening, casting upon the calm water, casting a golden across the calm water. Farmers used every possible hour of grow barley, rye, and oats. They raised sheeps, goats, cattles that were essential for food, clothing, and survival. In winter, the world changed completely. Darkness stretched the lands, and stoves owed hounds fence. During these close gatherings of wooden houses, sharing stories, toys, kiss was needless for the return of the sun. The Viking world was not a place of constant war, as many modern stories sometimes suggest. In reality, most Fungvirheimst traveled far from their homes. Their daily lives were centered around family, land, and community. Villages were small, and everyone depended on one another. When storms arrived from the North Sea, powerful the winds good billings and sketching waves, sand waves against quality energy. Yet these over generations, they became skilled sailors, careful builders, and some sellers and patient survivors. The sea itself was never simply a barrier. But the barrier for the people of Scandinavia The ocean was the road connecting distant lands. Small lands. Small wooden boats were already common along the coasts, used for fishing and travel. Over time, these time became more advanced. Shipbuilders learned how to shape long, narrow hulls and hello, I am river. Were flexible, strong, and surprisingly fast. Well, thank you, boss. How about pros my eyes? Or glide silently along shallow rivers, long before the famous Viking raids began. I've been painting again railways. Oh, I think I've anything all. They exchanged furs, amber, walrus ivory, and iron tools with neighboring regions. These early Onis toured the much world, and although the mapping yet their ships with hours of miles in ocean. In this many destinations. Civilizations. For now, however, the villages of Scandinavia and be small and small. Oh. Rose, Jan, loose. Children played near the water's edge. And Sherman returned with their nets filled with cod and herring, and in the quiet, as the wind moves. The stories about gods, laws, and glows, distant lands beyond the horizon, sent farm stood the longhouse. These Bordemoon's launch would are under one roof. Oh. Longhouse could stretch, but stretched 15 independently who owned it. Who owned it. The walls were usually built from timber and covered layers of clay that perturbed interior from cold winds. The roof was thick and heavy, a cover that continued to grow during the warmer months. Inside, the space was lit. There were no glass lights. In the lights windows, no glendone came mainly from the central fire that burned slowly along the middle of the building. The smoke from this fire drifted upward toward a small opening in the roof. Though much of it remained inside the room, over time, the wooden beams with soot, giving the interior deep on shadowed appearance. Along both sides of the longhouse were wooden benches covered with these served as beds during the night. Families wrapped in wool blankets while the wind howled outside. The warmth of the animals warmth of Dalton's stops of him. Sheep, goats, sometimes even cows. Ishel kunstrath being. During the coldest months, life inside the longhouse was rarely quiet. Children laughed, and the sound of tools striking dissolutely through the space. Women spent much of their time spinning wool into thread and weaving cloth on looms. All wooden looms. Clothing in the Viking world was practical but carefully made. Wool, linen, and leather, common materials, and dyes from plants were used to create a breezed shades of red, blue, and yellow. Food preparation was another constant activity. Were simple but nourishing. Bread made from barley was common, often served alongside fish, cheese, and thick stews of vegetables and meat. During the autumn months, to preserve food for winter, fish were dried in the cold northern air. Meat was salted and grown carefully in wooden containers. Evenings in the longhouse were often filling. These stories were not only but also a way of preserving memory, tales of Odin and Odin. Tales of Odin, Thor, and Loki passed from generation to generation. He carried spellwalkers by spoken words rather than written pages. The Vikings, where history, myth, and were deeply connected. As the fire slowly burned lower during the night, the sounds the longhouse and outside and across the mountains and sea, and beneath the heavy wooden roof, families together, for another day in the chimneys of the new people of Scandinavia had lived close to the sea. Something began to change. Ships became larger and stronger, and sailors Erlings, Farmpigamflors. These developments marked the quiet lines now call the Viking Age. One of the earliest recorded events took place in the years 700 in the year 700 on a small island off the northeast coast of England. Stood a peaceful monastery known as Lindisfarne. Monks living there spent their days in prayer, study, and quiet work. But one summer, ships appeared suddenly on the horizon. They were long, narrow was the prows. Waves above the water. The arrival of these ships shocked beyond warriors. Warrior stepped onto the shore, moving quickly through the monastery. The monastery was brief but unforgettable. News of the events spread rapidly across Europe, and many chronicles described becoming new era. Yet, for the Scandinavians themselves, these voyages were not only raiding. Many journeys, peace, residence, fun, and exploration. Viking merchants traveled east along the rivers of Russia, connecting the Baltic Sea, the Islamic world, and the Indic world. Others, the word wisdom. The avenue. And Greenland. These sailors relied on remarkable navigational skills. Without compasses or mod maps, they observed the position of the sun, the patterns of ocean currents. Some sagas even describe the use of special crystals known as sunstones, which may have locate the hidden sun behind clouds. The Viking ships themselves were masterpieces of engineering. Wooden plank allowed the hulls to bend slightly with the waves, preventing them from breaking in rough seas. Their shallow design meant they could travel up rivers and land, eliminating them. Then they need harbors for the sailors standing on these of vessels. The horizon must have seemed endless. Postbavary. Bong. Or danger. But above all, it carried perimus of movement, of traveling beyond the familiar of home, and vast and unworld. along cold-shored Avia, the art of shipbuilding slowly to see respecting studies in Viking society. In quiet coastal settlements, skilled craftsmen spends strongs, shape tree, the vessels that one day travel across vast and uncertain waters. Builders understood the sea in a way few others did. They knew how storms moved across the horizon and how this twist even the strongest ship was poorly designed. A Viking ship usually began full of timber. Which was preferred because flexibility. Split the wood into long planks using a pin. By hand, instead of creating thick, rigid hulls, devils, the technique is known for building. This method helped moving through rough seas. Iron rivets the planks together. Is and try and blind the aims from his again. The result of vessel, both durable, long ships, snuffs, mushy ships. Designed for speed. Their narrow allowed them to cut through waves easily, while rows of oars gave sailority. Calm, at the center of the ship stood a single tall mast carrying a square wool sail. When strong winds filled the sail, ship tripped for its time. Yet the sail was only one part of the vessel's power. The crew elves were equally important. Viking sailors worked together in rhythm, edeling, cross long distances. Many carved at the front, as serpents. These carvings were believed to frighten evil spirits temporarily during the journeys when approaching friendly land. Sometimes sailors removed the figureheads out of respore for the local spirits of the shore. Shipbuilding knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Apprentices as punentets leven entman and efsmel patience. What is over time these traditions creating these traditions created vessel of cabling and falsas as the uppins. Across the open sea. Without these ships, the Viking Age would never have unfolded in the way it did. Vast and unpredictable. People of Sinevid as with confidence. Their ships became the bridges that connected distant worlds. And mice, dead warriors. Most Vikings spent the majority of their lives as farmers. Agriculture formed foundation of Scandinavian society. Every spring, families prepared their fields. As soon foes began to soften under the returning sunlight. The growing season in northern Europe was short, and every day mattered. Pumroots and dry crops. Small vegetable gardens produced onions, cabbage, beans, land herbs. Stock were equally important. Sheep provided wool, cows, and toothsome meat could be preserved for winter. Farm life required constant effort. At sunrise, people were already awake, feeding animals, preparing tools for the day's work. Wooden house, plows pulled by ox slowly turned the soil. Helped collect eggs, carry water, and gather firewood from nearby forests. During the warmer months, the countryside alive with activity. Waves filled gently in the wind, and the smell of fresh grass filled the air. Worked hustling that a harvest would determine whether their families could survive the long winter ahead. Autumn was the most important of the year. Aliens. And sometimes soul could be so dried. Fish caught from the sea to dry in the cold air. Last for the months. For many months, when winter finally arrived, daily life moved indoors. Norse covered the land, and travel became difficult. Inside the longhouse, families repaired tools, craft fellowships, filming. Storytelling also an important came turned pardoned. art of winter evenings. Elders shared tales of ancestors and heroic that stretched across the sea. Although that Viking myth is often remembered for battles and raids. Favorite words of their world, without strong farms and stable communities. The long voyages of the Bell have the Viking would not have on the lean world. Religion was woven deeply. The people of Scandinavia believed that powerful God shaped the forces of around them. Thunderstorms, fertile soil, and winter snow, all as expressions of divine power. One of the most respected gods was Odin, known as the wise ruler of the gods. According the gods of Nudalling constantly sought knowledge and understanding. Stories describe him traveling across the world in disguise, learning secrets from both humans and spirits. Ravens named Hugin Minin were said to fly across Earth each day, bringing back to him. Another well-known god was Thor, the protector of both gods and humans. Thor was assailed when storms flashed across the sky. Many the sky believed it was the sound of Thor's hammer strand with the clouds. Through the clouds, farmers fought for protection of their crops and homes. Freya, a goddess connected with love and beauty, was oddly respected. She was the watchful of both life death, guiding certain warriors to the afterlife. The Viking view of the universe was complex and imaginative. According to their stories, the world Ixtasmix tree grew as its branches stretched across different realms, connecting gods, humans, and other mystical beings. Religious ceremonies were often held outdoors. Sacred groves, and serves samples as bronze as offering remains. These offerings sometimes included food, fumals, animals, or valuable objects. The purpose was to maintain beings and primitives force to shape the world. The world, although Christianity, or eventuality, the Bumiathar. The old Norse beliefs remained strong. These myths influence the dangers of the natural world around them. While many Viking voyages focused on trade and occasional raids, saves syns presented the lands that are new lands. These the explorers farther west into the Atlantic than anyone from Europe had gone before. Around the year 870, Norse settlers began in Iceland. The island was remote and largely uninhabited. Unlimited. Families from Norway established farms along the coastal valleys, bringing livestock and farming with them. Over time, Iceland developed its own unique Viking culture. One of the most famous explorers of this period was the Red. After exiled from Iceland because of conflict, he sailed westward and discovered a large icy island that he named Greenland. The name was likely chosen to attract settlers, even though much of the island was covered in ice. Despite the harsh climate, small Viking communities, the celebrating community, they raised livestock, hunted seals, walrus ivory with Europe. Perhaps the most remarkable journey occurred when Eric the Red Sun and Leif Erikson sailed even farther west around the year 1000. To historical sagas, Leif and his crew reached a land filled with forests and wild. This place became known as Vinland. Modern archaeological scribes found land, Canada. If this interpretation is correct, means explorers reached North America. Columbus. These journeys across the Atlantic were extremely dangerous. Storms could appear suddenly, and ships without a trace. Yet the Viking sailors continued exploring, guided by the sun, stars, and their knowledge of the sea. Their courage and curiosity allowed them to connect the ways that people in time imagine Over time, the world around the Vikings slowly began European change. European kingdoms grew stronger, built bound defense against raids. Large monasteries bulged burst walls. It's far more difficult. At the same time, Scandinavia itself, Palkings changing. Powerful kings emerging in Norway, Denmark, in Norway, and Sweden, creating more organized governments. These rulers, stability, trade, and diplomacy, rather than constant raiding. Christianity also spread throughout the region. Missionaries but religion. Churches replaced many Anglican temples largely bulleted with Christian beliefs. Trade networks expanded. Net expanded as far away as rather than feared raiders. By the mid-11th century, history. In the 11th century, it's generally considered the Viking Age. The Vikings did their ships, their stereotypes in traditionalist populations deep mark on history. Today, the quiet fjords of Norway and the lunar that is the style of this era. Long ago, beneath northern skies filled with stars and drifting clouds, the people we now call the Vikings lived ordinary lives shaped by the sea, the land, and the passing of time. And as the cold and blurred Neptune moved gently against the shore, the Stoilers those sailors, unhonored, peace-long, history of the North.